returning from the most important swim of his life. His boss, Catherine, stood frozen at the poolside, her stopwatch still running though the race was clearly over. "I won," he managed between labored breaths. "And now about what I want." The request that followed would change both their lives forever, in ways neither of them could have imagined. If you're touched by Mark's journey, please hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories that remind us how a single moment of courage can transform everything. Your support helps us bring these emotional real-life stories to more viewers just like you. The chlorine scent hung heavy in the air as Mark Jenkins stared at the ceiling of the community pool, counting the fluorescent lights to calm his nerves. At 42, he hadn't competed in anything since high school track meets, yet here he was, about to race his boss in what felt like the most consequential swim of his life. "Dad, you've got this." Emma's voice echoed across the natatorium, her 11-year-old enthusiasm cutting through his doubt. She sat on the bleachers, legs swinging, her bright pink cast on her right arm a stark reminder of why they were here in the first place. Mark forced a smile and gave her a thumbs up, though his stomach churned with anxiety. 6 months ago, he wouldn't have dreamed of challenging Catherine Winters, the owner of Winters Architectural Design where he'd worked as a draftsman for 3 years. But 6 months ago, his wife hadn't walked out on them, leaving him a single father with mounting medical bills and a daughter who needed specialized orthopedic surgery. Catherine emerged from the locker room in a professional black one-piece swimsuit, her usual commanding presence somehow amplified rather than diminished by the casual setting. At 38, she was known throughout Portland's business community for her ruthless efficiency and competitive drive. The architectural firm she'd built from scratch had become one of the most prestigious in the Pacific Northwest, and Mark had always considered himself lucky to work there, even if Catherine's demanding standards often meant late nights and weekend work. "Ready to lose gracefully, Jenkins?" Catherine called out, her voice carrying the same confident tone she used in boardroom presentations. She adjusted her swim cap with practiced precision, revealing none of the surprise she'd shown when Mark had approached her with this unusual proposition 2 weeks ago. Mark nodded, unable to find his voice as he remembered their conversation in her office. "A swimming race?" Catherine had repeated, looking up from the blueprints spread across her desk. "You want to bet on a swimming race against me?" "Yes," Mark had replied, his voice steadier than he felt. "If I win, I get what I need. If you win, I'll work overtime for 6 months without complaint or additional pay." Catherine had studied him with those penetrating gray eyes that missed nothing. "And what exactly do you need, Mark?" He'd hesitated then, embarrassed but desperate. "Time. Flexibility with my schedule for Emma's recovery. And..." He'd swallowed hard, "the company's help with her medical expenses." To his surprise, Catherine hadn't immediately dismissed him. Instead, she'd leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled. "You know I was a competitive swimmer in college?" "Yes," he'd admitted. That was precisely why he'd chosen swimming. The office rumor mill had long established that Catherine had nearly qualified for Olympic trials in her youth. It was a challenge he was almost certain to lose, but he needed to show her how far he was willing to go. 2 weeks from today. Olympic pool at the community center. 800 meters. She'd named the distance with a slight smile. "I admire your determination, Mark, but I hope you've been training." He hadn't been, not really. Between work and caring for Emma, there hadn't been time. But he'd spent every lunch break and early morning since then in the pool, pushing his body to its limits, knowing it probably wouldn't be enough. Now, as they took their positions at the starting blocks, Mark caught Emma's eye once more. The hope in her face steeled his resolve. This wasn't just about money or time off. This was about showing his daughter that her father would do anything for her, even make a fool of himself challenging the boss everyone feared. "Swimmers, take your marks," called the lifeguard they'd recruited as an official timekeeper. Mark bent into position, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Go!" They hit the water simultaneously, Catherine with a perfect racing dive, Mark with more determination than technique. The cold shock jolted through his system, momentarily clearing his mind of everything except the task at hand. For the first 200 meters, they remained surprisingly close. Mark's recent training had improved his endurance more than he'd expected, and adrenaline carried him forward. Catherine's technique was flawless, each stroke powerful and efficient, but Mark matched her with raw effort. By the halfway point, the burning in his muscles had become nearly unbearable. Catherine had pulled ahead by almost half a length, her rhythm unwavering. Mark's lungs screamed for more oxygen than his gasping breaths could provide. His vision narrowed to the black line at the bottom of the pool and the churning water ahead where Catherine cut through like a knife. "Keep going, Dad." Emma's voice reached him during a turn, and something shifted inside him. The memory of Emma's face when she'd fallen from the playground equipment, the quiet dignity with which she'd endured the pain while they waited for the ambulance, the brave smile she'd given him when the doctors explained she would need surgery and extensive physical therapy. Mark dug deeper, finding reserves of strength he didn't know he possessed. His technique deteriorated as exhaustion set in, but his pace increased. 600 meters. 700. Each stroke felt like moving through concrete, but he was gaining ground. Catherine's lead had narrowed. In the final 50 meters, Mark abandoned all technique for pure survival swimming, his arms windmilling desperately as he gasped for air. The world had narrowed to just this moment, just this impossible task. He couldn't see Catherine anymore, couldn't tell if he was ahead or behind. His hand slammed against the wall, and he surfaced, gulping air, unable even to look at the clock or Catherine's position. It was only when he heard Emma's shriek of delight that he forced his eyes open. Catherine was touching the wall just as he looked up, her expression a mixture of disbelief and something else, something that looked almost like respect. 32 seconds, the lifeguard announced, looking at Mark. 33 seconds, he added, nodding at Catherine. 1 second. He'd won by 1 second. Mark's trembling hands clutched the edge of the pool as he gasped for breath, his muscles burning from the most important swim of his life. His boss, Catherine, stood frozen at the poolside, her stopwatch still running though the race was clearly over. "I won," he managed between labored breaths. "And now about what I want." Catherine pulled herself from the pool with graceful efficiency, water streaming from her athletic frame. Her face was unreadable as she reached for her towel. "In my office tomorrow morning," she said curtly. "We'll discuss the terms." Emma rushed to the poolside, careful to keep her cast dry. "Dad! You did it! You actually beat Ms. Winters." Mark hauled himself out of the pool, his limbs feeling like lead weights. "Looks like I did, kiddo." He wrapped her in a one-armed hug, not caring that he was soaking her clothes. Catherine watched them for a moment, her expression softening almost imperceptibly before she turned and walked toward the locker rooms without another word. The next morning, Mark sat nervously in Catherine's office, his still aching muscles a reminder of yesterday's improbable victory. He'd arrived early, determined to appear professional despite the unusual circumstances of their meeting. Catherine entered precisely at 9, immaculately dressed in her signature charcoal suit, no trace of yesterday's defeat visible in her composed demeanor. "I've reviewed your daughter's medical information," she began without preamble, placing a folder on her desk. "The surgery she needs is specialized, and the recovery will be extensive." Mark nodded, his throat tight. 6 to 8 months of physical therapy, they said. "Which is why you need a flexible schedule." Catherine sat down, fixing him with that penetrating gaze. "And financial assistance." "Yes." Mark straightened in his chair. "I know it's a lot to ask, but..." Catherine held up a hand, silencing him. "You won our bet, fair and square." "I honor my commitments, Mark." She opened the folder and pushed a document across the desk. "This is what I'm prepared to offer." Mark scanned the paper, his eyes widening as he read. It wasn't just schedule flexibility, it was a complete work-from-home arrangement for the duration of Emma's recovery. And the financial support wasn't merely assistance, it was full coverage of all medical expenses not handled by insurance. This is more than we agreed on, he said, looking up in confusion. Catherine's expression remained neutral. Consider it an investment. You've proven your dedication, both to your daughter and to this firm. I value that kind of commitment. Mark stared at her, speechless. This wasn't the cold, demanding boss he'd worked under for 3 years. There's one condition, Catherine added, her tone becoming businesslike again. You'll need to check in daily and maintain your current productivity levels. I'm not running a charity, Jenkins. Of course, Mark agreed quickly. I won't let you down. Catherine nodded, then hesitated, something unusual for her. May I ask you something personal? Surprised, Mark nodded. Why swimming? You must have known about my background. You had to know the odds were against you. Mark considered his answer carefully. Precisely because the odds were against me. I needed to show you, and Emma, that I was willing to do something impossible for her. For the first time in their professional relationship, Mark saw Catherine smile genuinely. Well, you certainly did that. She stood, signaling the end of the meeting. One more thing. Emma's physical therapy, I know a specialist who's the best in the state. I've taken the liberty of scheduling a consultation next week. Mark rose, clutching the agreement. Thank you, Catherine. I don't know what else to say. Don't thank me yet, she replied, her usual brisk tone returning. You still have deadlines to meet. Now, go call your daughter with the good news. Over the following weeks, Mark settled into his new work routine, converting his small dining room into a home office while Emma began her recovery from surgery. The operation had gone well, and though the physical therapy was grueling, Emma approached it with the same determination Mark had shown in the pool. What surprised him most was Catherine's continued involvement. The specialist she'd recommended was indeed exceptional, but more unexpected were Catherine's occasional visits to their modest apartment, ostensibly to drop off work materials but inevitably staying to check on Emma's progress. On one such visit, about 2 months after the race, Mark found Catherine and Emma deep in conversation at the kitchen table, architectural sketches spread between them. Ms. Winters says I have a good eye for design, Emma announced proudly as Mark entered with coffee. She's teaching me about load-bearing walls. Is she now? Mark raised an eyebrow at Catherine, who looked almost embarrassed at being caught in this moment of mentorship. Your daughter asked about my work, Catherine explained, accepting the coffee. She has natural talent. Later, after Emma had gone to bed, Catherine lingered, examining the cramped living space with a critical eye. This apartment isn't ideal for someone recovering from orthopedic surgery, she observed. The bathroom is too small for proper mobility, and these narrow hallways must be difficult to navigate with crutches. Mark sighed. It's what we can afford. The location is good for Emma's school, at least. Catherine was quiet for a moment, then said, the firm is working on a residential development with accessibility features. There's a model unit sitting empty. It might be more suitable during Emma's recovery. Mark stared at her. Catherine, we couldn't possibly. It's a business decision, she interrupted. I need someone to test the practical aspects of the design. Consider it part of your job. Before Mark could argue further, Catherine gathered her things. At the door, she paused. Emma mentioned her mother hasn't been in contact. The statement hung in the air, neither a question nor an accusation, but Mark felt compelled to respond. Melissa decided family life wasn't for her. The divorce was finalized just before Emma's accident. She's in California now, with her new boyfriend. Catherine nodded, her expression unreadable. Emma's lucky to have you. I'm the lucky one, Mark replied honestly. Something shifted in Catherine's eyes then, a softening that transformed her face. Good night, Mark, she said quietly, and was gone before he could respond. The model home was everything their apartment wasn't, spacious, modern, and perfectly adapted for someone with mobility challenges. Emma fell in love with it immediately, claiming the large bedroom with windows overlooking a small garden. "Dad, there are grab bars in the shower," she exclaimed during their tour. "And look, the counters are lower so I can reach them from my wheelchair when I'm having a bad day." Mark watched his daughter's excitement with a mixture of gratitude and unease. Catherine's generosity was becoming harder to view as purely professional, and he wasn't sure what to make of that. His confusion only grew when Catherine began joining them for dinner once a week, ostensibly to discuss work and get Emma's feedback on the accessibility features. These dinners gradually evolved from formal business discussions to relaxed conversations where Catherine revealed glimpses of the person behind the professional facade. "My father was an architect," she told them one evening over pasta. "He designed spaces that looked impressive but were impossible to live in. Beautiful staircases with treads too narrow for actual feet, kitchens where you couldn't open the refrigerator and the dishwasher at the same time. Is that why you're so focused on practical design?" Emma asked, twirling spaghetti around her fork with her good hand. Catherine nodded. "Form follows function. Always. Like how you swim," Emma observed. "No wasted movement." Catherine looked surprised, then pleased. "Exactly like that." Mark watched this exchange, struck by how comfortable Emma had become with Catherine, and how different Catherine seemed in their home compared to the office. Here, she laughed more easily, listened more attentively, and occasionally even helped with the dishes despite his protests. One night, after Emma had gone to bed, Catherine lingered at the kitchen counter, wine glass in hand. "She's making remarkable progress," she commented. "The physical therapist says she's ahead of schedule." "She's determined," Mark agreed, loading the dishwasher. "Gets that from her mother." Catherine studied him. "I think she gets it from you, actually." Mark looked up, surprised. "That race," Catherine continued, her voice softer than usual. "I've competed against national champions who didn't push as hard as you did that day." Mark felt his face warm. "I had more at stake than they did." "Yes," Catherine agreed. "You did." She set down her glass. "Which brings me to something I've been meaning to discuss with you." Mark straightened, suddenly apprehensive. "Your work these past months has been exceptional," she said. "Even with everything you're managing at home. I'd like to offer you a promotion, Senior Project Manager for Residential Developments." Mark stared at her. "But that position requires an architectural license." "Yes. The firm will sponsor your completion of the licensing exams." "Catherine, I don't know what to say." She smiled, that rare genuine smile that transformed her face. "Say yes. The firm needs someone with your perspective. Someone who understands that buildings aren't just structures, they're homes for people with real lives and real challenges." Mark felt something shift between them, the professional boundary blurring into something more complex. "Why are you doing all this?" he asked quietly. Catherine was silent for a long moment. "When you challenged me to that race, it was the first time in years anyone had surprised me. You were willing to risk humiliation for your daughter. It made me reevaluate some things." "What things?" She met his gaze directly. "What success really means. What matters." She glanced toward Emma's bedroom. "Who matters?" The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. "I should go," Catherine said finally, gathering her things. At the door, she turned back. "Think about the promotion. No pressure, but the team could use someone like you." After she left, Mark stood in the quiet kitchen, wondering how a desperate challenge had led to this unexpected turning point in their lives. 6 months after the surgery, Emma's cast was removed for good. Her physical therapy continued, but she could now walk without assistance and had regained most of her mobility. To celebrate this milestone, Catherine suggested a small gathering at the model home. Just a few people from the office,